morning, all. My name is Joe Thomas. I serve as the class of 1961 professor of leadership education here in Luce Hall at the Naval Academy, and I'd like to pass along my welcome to all of you. This seems, certainly I've sat in on yesterday's events and this morning's events so far, and it just seems that year after year this conference gets better and better. So thanks to the Hearts and thanks to the class of 1938 once again for that, because it's truly a highlight of the calendar for us annually. Now, I've done a few of these before as panel moderator, I've got to say, over the years. And when I was approached this year and requested to serve as a panel moderator again, of course I'm deeply honored. My immediate answer was yes. And then they kind of dropped on me, well, it's a panel about failure. I thought, well, wait a minute. You asking, why are you? But having then been handed the panelists that were on this particular panel, I realized very quickly that with the exceptional success that all four of them have enjoyed in their careers and the larger conference theme we received after that of adversity and kind of leading through crisis situations, I realized that my reaction to this concept of failure was instructive by itself, right? Because many of us as leaders, I think, hear that word failure and think of the finality of it. And nothing could be further from the truth, because failure, after all, is a very distinct and one would say important part of life, and it's certainly a very distinct and very important part of your leader development as well. So with that said, and with all of the background we had yesterday, starting really with the Superintendent Admiral Miller, continuing on through Director Free and others, there had been references back to individuals who experienced a great deal of adversity and, in fact, failure across a span of their life. And we probably spent more time talking about one in particular than anyone else, and that was Abraham Lincoln. You heard both from Admiral Miller in detail about Lincoln, of course, the recent movie, and certainly Director Free talked about Lincoln as well. Well, it's almost cliche at this point to hear about the failures of Abraham Lincoln. In fact, historians kind of debate how much of the failure that he experienced actually occurred. Some of it's apocryphal, but I wanted to take just a moment to tie together this individual failure, this concept of individual failure, to who is arguably one of the greatest leaders produced by this country. And perhaps you've heard these things before. Again, you see these in everything from magazines to, in fact, there were billboards that kind of captured some of this. He was born in 1809. He was assassinated at age 55 in 1865. But in the span of that relatively short life, in 1816, his family was forced out of their home. He had to work to support them. In 1818, his mother died. In 1831, he failed in business. In 32, he ran for the state legislature and lost. In 1832, later on in that year, he lost his job and wanted to go to law school but couldn't get in. In 1833, he borrowed some money from a friend and began a business. By the end of the year, he was bankrupt. He spent 17 years of his life paying off the debt incurred there. In 34, he ran for the state legislature again and won. First significant success he experienced in his life. In 1835, he was engaged to be married. She died. His heart was broken. In 1836, he appears to have had a total nervous breakdown. In 38, sought to become Speaker of the state legislature and was defeated. In 46, ran for Congress again, and this time he won. 1848, ran for re-election and lost. He ran for the Senate and lost in 1854. And 56, sought the vice presidential nomination, lost in that bid, ran for the Senate once again in 1858 and lost, and so on and so on and so on. It's a record one could say would be discouraging to even the most dedicated individuals, right? And again, it almost serves as a cliche today because we think of Lincoln in those terms. An interesting prerequisite for someone considered generally to be, again, one of the greatest leaders ever produced by this country. Now, with that as backdrop at the individual level, it probably needs to be said the topic of this panel will be to apply some of those lessons from adversity, lessons of failure, to the organizational level. Right? In fact, in many ways, the organizational level is why we're here. Although we spent the significant portion of yesterday talking about individual attributes, today's focus expands a little bit, and it starts with this panel, and focuses on institutions and organizations, and your leadership role in those. So the topic of the panel, selected by the midshipmen who are in charge of this conference, is building a foundation of success on the heels of failure. And I'll give you a quick summary of that. Our world is filled with failed organizations that dissolved because organizational leaders could not overcome failure or adversity. Some of these organizations survive through the appointment of new leadership. There is great risk involved in taking command of an organization deemed unsalvageable. It takes a unique leader and convincing vision to renew vigor and revitalize an organization on the eve of destruction. What are the key components to rebuilding an organization after failure? How does a leader inspire members of an organization to remain loyal and dedicated in the aftermath of defeat? What challenges do an organization and its leadership face in this type of environment? And the four panelists, once again, that have been gathered to answer this particular challenge, I think are quite amazing and unprecedented, at least in my involvement with panels here at the Academy. Starting on your left, Lieutenant Commander Meagan V. Flannigan was raised in Pittsburgh, PA. All right, another Pennsylvanian. She's a 2002 graduate of the United States Naval Academy, receiving a Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering. Lieutenant Commander Flannigan reported to Naval Air Station Pensacola for flight training in June of 2002. In January 2004, she was designated a naval aviator and ordered to the Grim Reapers of VF 101, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, at Naval Air Station Oceana for training in the F-14D Tomcat. Of course, the aircraft made famous by Top Gun. Following FRS training, Lieutenant Commander Flannigan received orders to the Black Lions of VF 213 at NAS Oceana. The squadron deployed to the Arabian Gulf aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom from September 2005 to March 2006. In October 2006, she completed transition syllabus to the F-18 Super Hornet with the Gladiators of VFA 106. In May of 2008, Lieutenant Commander Flannigan reported to the staff of the Commander, Navy Region Mid-Atlantic, where she served as flag aide to Rear Admiral Mark Bonsall. At the completion of that tour, she was assigned to return to VFA 106 as an instructor pilot, where she is currently serving. Lieutenant Commander Flannigan has accumulated over 1,250 hours and over 180 arrested landings. She has numerous awards, and she currently resides in Norfolk, Virginia, with her husband and daughter. Welcome, Commander Flannigan. Next to Commander Flannigan, we have Fire Commissioner Salvatore Cassano. Salvatore Cassano was appointed Fire Commissioner by Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg, effective January 1st, 2010. He is the 32nd Fire Commissioner in the 145-year history of the New York Fire Department. Commissioner Cassano has served over 43 years with experience in the Fire Department of New York and has held every uniformed rank. Heads the world's largest fire department with more than 16,000 fire, EMS, and civilian members, and an annual budget of $1.6 billion. That's with a B. Prior to his appointment by the mayor, Commissioner Cassano served as the fire department's chief of department, the highest ranking uniformed officer, from 2006 to 2010, overseeing many of the agency's most important bureaus, including fire, EMS, operations, training, safety, fire prevention, and communications. Commissioner Cassano played a crucial role in rebuilding the department in the wake of the September 11th tragedy and the loss of 343 members of the New York City Fire Department. His career with the fire department began with his appointment as firefighter on November 29th, 1969. Prior to joining the fire department in New York, Commissioner Cassano served in the U.S. Army from October 65 through July 67 and was deployed to Vietnam in September of 1966. In September of 2009, Commissioner Cassano was awarded France's highest decoration, the Legion d'Honneur, by French President Nicolas Sarkozy. And Commissioner Cassano grew up in Brooklyn, is a lifelong resident of New York City. He and his wife Teresa reside in Staten Island. They have 5 children and 6 grandchildren. So welcome, Commissioner Cassano. Next to me, on my left, your right, Sergeant Major Carlton Kent served 36 years as a United States Marine until retiring as the 16th Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps in June of 2011. Sergeant Major Kent has served at numerous levels as a non-commissioned officer and staff non-commissioned officer. Some of his billets include drill instructor, chief instructor at the non-commissioned officer school and tactics school, platoon sergeant, company gunnery sergeant, company first sergeant, and numerous levels at sergeant major. Sergeant Major Kent also served at the American embassies in Kinshasa, Zaire, and Panama City, Panama. After those 36 years as a Marine, Sergeant Major Kent has currently taken a job as the Director of Veteran Support and Development Office of CACI International Incorporated. And he's moving on to take over his own business with the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, his former Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. He has numerous awards and decorations to include the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, and Bronze Star. And he is a recipient of the Gerald C. Thomas Award for Inspirational Leadership and the recipient of the Marine Corps League's Military Order of the Iron Mike Award. Sergeant Major Kent holds a bachelor's degree in workforce education and development, magna cum laude from Southern Illinois University, and he's currently working on an MBA at Trident University International. For some reason, just being around the Sergeant Major, I feel myself always having to stand at the position of attention. Sergeant Majors tend to have that. I'm a retired Marine. So Sergeant Majors tend to have that effect on me. There's no question about that. And then lastly, certainly not least, on the far right, Colonel John J.V. Venable. He was commissioned in 1981 through the Air Force ROTC program at The Ohio University, Athens, Ohio. He is a fighter weapons school graduate who was commanded at both the squadron and group levels. In his last command, he led the 379th Expeditionary Operations Group during Operations Iraqi and Enduring Freedom, a command that encompassed 1,100 personnel and $5 billion, again with a B, in aircraft assets based at 3 different geographic locations, each engaged in combat. Colonel Venable is a fighter. In 1996, he was diagnosed with cancer and told, among other things, that he would never fly again. Through sheer will and determination, he beat the disease and the ensuing medical board and went on to perhaps his most notable assignment as the commander and demonstration leader of the U.S. Air Force Air Demonstration Squadron, the Thunderbirds. He has served on 3 continents through 16 different assignments, holds master's degrees in aeronautical science from Embry-Riddle and strategic studies from the Air War College, and is a command pilot with over 350 combat and 4,400 total hours in the F-16 and the venerable OV-10 aircraft, the Bronco. So nice. So obviously, we've got quite a distinguished panel with considerable experience on the topic, as mentioned. So with that in mind, the rules of the game here will be, each will have an opportunity to say something briefly to us all, and then we're going to try to maximize the time for questions at the conclusion of this, and we'll kind of go in the same order, starting with Commander Flannigan, ending with Colonel Venable. And as soon as they're finished with their introductory remarks, we'll queue up at the mics, and I'll kind of shift back and forth with that. So without further ado, Commander Flannigan.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's always a privilege to get to come back to my old stomping ground, and to sit up here with these extraordinary gentlemen is just as a highlight for me so far in my career. When I thought about what I could bring to this group of people, I think I bring the middle management perspective. For the non-military people, I'm a lieutenant commander, which puts me somewhere kind of in the middle of the rank system of the military. And I think it's important to remember that leadership really is at all levels. It's at a squad leader during plebe summer at the Naval Academy, or the ship supervisor somewhere, all the way up to a CEO or the CNO of the Navy. And we can take kind of leadership roles all throughout that spectrum. For me, I had what I will call the privilege of having a major time of adversity in my career early on. At the time, I wouldn't have told you it was a privilege or anything good, because it was quite a struggle. But the brief synopsis of my junior officer story is, on my first deployment flying the F-14D Tomcat, I hit a roadblock with my consistency in being able to land safely aboard the ship, which, as a naval aviator, that is kind of our bread and butter. And if you can't do that effectively, you're not going to do it at all. And it got to a point where it could have potentially jeopardized my ability or my right to continue flying aircraft, definitely flying the F-14, flying in the Navy, period, my military career. It also happened to me while I was on deployment, so it was very isolating. And at the time, it was very difficult. But I look back on it now as almost the highlight of my career, in the sense that the major building blocks of my character were built during that period of time, because I was able to step back, analyze what was happening, reach in and just kind of find some motivation, find my confidence, talk to people who are senior to me, talk to my peers, talk to people who are in my family and my friends to figure out what I needed to do as far as what steps I needed to take to move past that. So as when we talk about moving on from adversity or from failure, that was a point of failure in my career. And if it had continued on that trajectory, my career would not be where it is today. Luckily, I was able to do those things, and I was able to move past it, and it really gave me the ability to be a better, more effective leader and a better, more effective officer in pretty much everything I do within the military and within my personal life. And then taking that and kind of moving it forward, after learning how to move past failure on an independent and on a personal level, now as working within a unit or working with a group of people, I've been able to take what I learned and really help the commands I've been with at this point. So I'm now an instructor pilot at the F-18 FRS, which means I get to fly the airplane, but it also means as a lieutenant commander in middle management, I'm working and I'm looking at a lot of different things. I'm looking at resources, money, people. As we know, the fiscal constraints right now are a big issue for every different facet of our economy. It's a big issue in the military, especially if you are in a support squadron. And I've been single-handedly asked to come into a position and look at our resources and figure out what I can do to fix those things. And because I've had independent failure and I've been able to take with all those things I already talked about and apply them to what I've learned, so now I've walked into a position where I've been handpicked to come in my command, and I've been able to analyze what's going on. I look at all the things that I can do to fix it, which really falls into leadership now because I'm working with military, I'm working with civilians, I'm talking contractors, federal employees, senior, junior, admirals, enlisted. I'm getting a lot of different data, and I'm using all that information to get better resources and funding and stuff that we need at our squadron to be successful. And if we don't have those things, I'm working with our command to figure out what we can do effectively to still meet our requirements as a production squadron. And all of that is because I've taken this independent failure and moved on. And so that's why I say it's really been a privilege in my career, a really good learning block. And I think, like I said, leadership happens at all levels. So I've had the ability now in the middle of my career to really work and help my command. And on Thursday this week, we're going to be briefing a very high admiral, and it's going to make a big difference. So the key is, when something isn't going well, what can I do to fix it? Stay positive, and working within a team, communication, respect, professionalism, up and down, no matter what your level is, no matter where you are in a company. All those things, I think, kind of help move you on into the right direction. So obviously, like I said, all the people in the panel, I'm definitely one of the more junior people, but I think in a lot of ways I can relate a little bit more to some of the earlier leadership challenges you'll be facing. I think we all aspire to reach these some of the goals and some of the levels that these gentlemen have, but obviously there's steps to get there. So I'm kind of one of the steps in the middle.
Thank you. Thanks. Commissioner Cassano.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and speak to such a wonderful group. As I have four loves in my life, my family for sure, my church, my country, and the FDNY, where I spent the last 43 years of my life. And to be able to speak to you a little bit about that and let you know the character of the people that encompass the department, it's really an honor and a privilege. I took on a leadership role really early on in my career. I got promoted to lieutenant and commanded a squad just to try to affiliate it with the armed forces. And then as a company commander, and then as a battalion chief, a whole battalion, then as a division chief, and then finally a borough chief. So my leadership was being built up, and then September 11th hit, and as Professor Thomas said, we lost 343 members of the department, and that was more members than we had lost in the previous 50 years combined. And we were at a crossroads in the department. People within the department actually questioned how we were going to fight fires, how we were going to respond, how we were going to overcome so many of the adverse conditions that we faced. Some young gentleman mentioned counseling, which was a huge problem in the department because of the issues of fathers losing sons, sons losing fathers, brothers being killed, and so many relatives. And it was a very important part of our recovery effort. And yet we were tasked with rebuilding the department at the same time. The 343 members that we lost comprised 4,400 years of experience. Now, those were the people we would really count on to rebuild the department, and they weren't there. Personally, I lost my closest friend, who I'd grown up in the department with. And, excuse me, I lost people that I mentored. I lost people that mentored me. So personally for me, and I was the junior staff chief at the time, being promoted to the chief of operations and having to run the day-to-day operations while overcoming some of the things that were affecting myself, I had to jump out of my personal role and lead the department. And I really believe that from the time you step into a leadership role, you're building that capital. You just can't be meandering through your career, and then when that moment comes, that aha moment, and you have it, unless you've built that capital up through your career, you'll never be able to handle that challenge. And how do you do that? I think Susan hit it right on the head. You have to have some humility. You can't believe that this world, this globe is going to revolve around you and it's all about you. It's really not about you. It's about the people that serve with you. And they'll know if you're honest. They'll know if you're sincere. They'll know if you have their back. They'll know if you're consistent. Those are the characteristics that people are going to look at when you tell them, yes, we are going to fight fires like we've done for the last 135 years. We can't take a moment, an anomaly of 2 jetliners crashing into 210-story buildings and collapses and think that's the new world. While we're going to prepare for that, we still got to realize that what we were doing for the last 135 years pretty much worked. But now we're going to have to look at things differently, and that's what I was tasked with. But I had to instill the confidence in the people that I led, that I worked with, that I served with and for, that I was going to lead them down that road. They might not have always agreed with me, but they did have the confidence to know why I was doing it. I was doing it because of the department that I loved. I was doing it because of the character of the people that worked for us. And most importantly, I was doing it in memory of the 343 members that we lost and their families, to assure them that we would not let this happen again. So we brought in McKinsey also, because I knew that we were so personally affected by this tragedy that we would have never been able to look at it objectively and see what worked and what didn't work. And we worked very closely with McKinsey, but even before McKinsey had come, we had started to plan. I can remember early October of 2001, grabbing my hazmat chief, my special operations chief, and letting them know the world we live in is not the world we grew up in. We have to prepare for all new missions, and I'm going to ask you to help me lay that roadmap out for the department. So it started early October of 2001. McKinsey came in and worked with us for several months, and we laid out this roadmap. And while we were doing this, I was put into an administrative position after 30 years in the field. And while I did my administrative positions, I made sure that every night before I went home, I went down to the World Trade Center, I walked that site, every square foot of it, let the members know that were working there around the clock, 24 hours a day, that I was with them, that I had their back, that I was doing what they were doing not too long ago, so that they would have the confidence in the decisions that I was going to make, that I had them in mind. Yes, you have to see the job through the people that serve with you. They're the ones that are doing it. They have the greatest ideas in the world. And that's what got us through that most difficult time the department has ever faced. And I gave a talk on the 10th anniversary of September 11th, and I was proud to announce that the department was better prepared, better equipped, and better trained than ever in the history of the department. We actually rose from those ashes because of the confidence that people had in the staff that I picked, and the confidence in me, and the confidence that I had in the people that we hired, that we would be able to do this. And we got through it. We just don't fight fires anymore in the New York City Fire Department. We have so many other jobs. but we've been able to do that because of the leadership of the people that worked under me. I was just the maestro. They were doing it for me. So I appreciate being able to talk about the department a little bit and love to answer questions at the end.
Thank you, Commissioner Cassano. Sergeant Major Kent.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor, for me to be here with you this morning. First of all, let me just say, leadership is leadership. We call it Leadership 101 in the Corps, and that's basic leadership. I mean, every Marine started learning leadership from the time they step on the yellow footprints in boot camp or OCS. They begin with their leadership traits and principles. And I can tell you right now, junior people always watch their leaders. Either they want to be like their leaders or they don't want to be like their leaders. Fortunate, as a young Marine myself, I had some great leaders. I had great leaders leading me, and every time that I would make a mistake, they allowed me to bounce back from that mistake. And that was a great thing. And I've learned leadership at every level, served with great generals, served with great COs. Matter of fact, one of those generals sitting on the first row here, General Sattler, had a great opportunity to serve with him in combat. Positive leadership led to push in Fallujah, the second Fallujah, and he had all services that he was leading. And he was the epitome of a leader. So as you sit here today, I am not going to preach to you about leadership because all of you have leadership right now. It's the example that you have to watch as you go through those leadership processes. Either you're going to have a bad leader or you're going to have a good leader. Hopefully, each and every one of you will have a positive leader. But you could also learn from those bad leaders what not to do when you get in that position. And that's always a good thing to know. It's a great general had a quote. And this quote kind of sums up leadership for me. And that quote say, in this age, I don't care how tactically you are, brilliant you are, if you cannot create harmony, even vicious harmony, on the battlefield based on trust across service lines, across coalition and national lines, and across civilian and military lines, you need to go home because your leadership is obsolete. We have to have leaders who can create harmony across all lines. And that's where it starts for any unit. You got to create that team. You got to build that bond. And during my first command as a sergeant major, a young sergeant major, I realized that very quick. When I checked in, the previous sergeant major had been relieved of his duties. And as I went into that office and I spoke to my battalion commander, I kind of sensed that the battalion commander didn't really have any thoughts about a sergeant major because he had just relieved his sergeant major. So I could understand that. So the first day, he had a staff meeting where he get all his officers together. And usually the sergeant major is sitting there because the sergeant major is the right-hand man of any CO or CG. But the CO walked right by my office and did not even tell me that he had a staff meeting. Now, this is my first day. And for those that serve with me know I am not shy of speaking my mind when something's wrong. So I didn't say anything the first day because I am the new guy sitting in the seat. So the CO walked back by my office because, my office was right next to his office. So the very next day, staff meeting again. He walked by my office, get all his staff officers, and they have a staff meeting. I wait on the door to close, and that's when I say, okay, I see how this is going to work. So I walk in, open the door in the middle of the CO staff meeting, and he looks up at me and say, good morning, Sergeant Major. I say, good morning, sir. It's really great to be part of your staff meeting. I grab a chair and I pull it up next to him where the sergeant major usually sit next to the CO or the CG. And I say, Will I get a turn to say anything, sir? Oh, sure, Sergeant Major, whatever you want to say. So when it got around to my turn, that's how I started building the team. I say, look, I am here to assist in building this team, this war-fighting organization, because that's what we do, fight our nation's battles and win wars. And I am here as the Sergeant Major. And the Sergeant Major work across all lines, not just the enlisted, but work across the officers' lines. And that's when I learned that my CO, he was not a bad CO. He was a great leader. But I walked into one of those where he just didn't have respect for his Sergeant Major. So just to finish this off, build harmony, build that team. Thank you.
Colonel Venable.
Good morning. It's John Venable, JV, and if I look a little uncomfortable, it's because of years of running from the law and being on a stage with lights. So there's a couple of things behind it. I just give you a little bit of backdrop and a few thoughts that you can pick apart later through question and answers. I really enjoyed Susan's remarks earlier this morning about her role in an organization when things don't go exactly right. And the word she used was alone. And I'm going to chamber a couple of rounds with that. I got the opportunity to hear a gal speak several weeks ago. Her name was Margaret Wheatley, and she defined a leader as anybody who's able to recognize a problem and step up to it. I thought that was pretty bold. She further defined a leader as a very select group of people, very select, who are not afraid to be insecure. And I sat back on my heels and I thought about that for a while. You know, there's not one of you in this room that through the course of your life is not going to suffer some failure or walk into an organization that is on the heels of failure. And Margaret's words are pretty telling. It's your ability to recognize the failure before you do anything else. Now, sometimes when Sal was in New York, and you watch airplanes slam into the side of a building, the situation is set for you, and now it takes bold and courageous leadership to go from that point forward. That's on one extreme of recognition, but on the other is much more subtle and sometimes at least as deadly to an organization, a cancer that's infiltrated it, and it's up to you to recognize it, and it's up to you to take steps to move away from it or lead your team out of it. And the question is, will you recognize it when it takes place? Any organization I've walked into has had three different perspectives or view. There's the world view, that's the outsider's view. And for the Thunderbirds, that was mom and dads across the United States who looked at this squadron as a very elite group of professionals who did things right, lived on the edge of performance and risk. They were the standard by which discipline was set for the Air Force. They were the standard bearers of that organization. Inside the organization is an internal view, and inside the Thunderbirds, we had a great deal of that pride, and we had a great deal of technical competence. But there was also this underlying sentiment that we were deserving of something for the effort, and that was telling. The ground truth beyond that was up to me as an individual to discern. When you walk into your organization, what will you see and what notes will you take? If you walk in as an outsider coming in, you get a clear perspective. It's up to you to recognize it and then move beyond that. We had a series of aircraft mishaps in the previous years in the Thunderbirds, one of which set the team down for a month during the demonstration season. That's very costly to the civilian airshow industry, as well as our mission of going out engaging the public. And we had a series of alcohol-related incidents, one after another, that were blotter-worthy, that were telling. If you go out of your way to hire elite talent and elite minds, you've got to take the time to set elite goals. Because if you don't, those incredible individuals that you hire will either move to someone in another organization that will challenge them, or they will use all of that extra skill set and brain power to go out and challenge every boundary that they can find. In the outside world, you read about it on the upper fold of a paper, graft, corruption, infidelity, malfeasance. Inside of our services, well, you get the telltale signs of distractions like we had on the Thunderbirds. And I had experienced cancer in my life. I knew what it was like to sit back on the heels of failure, and I knew that I had to set pretty audacious goals, because if your whole objective is just to survive, you know, that's not that big of a carrot. You got to throw a bigger rock. And our organization, the Thunderbirds, needed some big rocks. And we set some big goals. So we had a picture. I had a picture of where we were. And we collectively set a vision for where we needed to be. And then we built a plan, just fundamental elements of how we would go about it. And our biggest goal was to double the direct exposure of the Thunderbirds to the public in 1 year. 10 million people, we reached out, we touched, they saw us in one way or another. And in 1 year's time, our goal was to double that. Now, the people who really knew what they were doing in that world sat back and thought that was crazy. But setting the building blocks and the footpath with which we can go forward in a fundamental plan and then letting them execute it was a great centering mechanism for us. The third step is perseverance. You know, you can find a definition on the internet or in any dictionary for perseverance, and it's basically continuing to wade through the abyss on your way to an objective without stopping. But there's only one book I've ever read that tells you where you get perseverance. It's kind of what Sal said earlier. It's the building of capital as you go. This book uses a direct phrase. It says the only way to get perseverance is through the testing of your faith. And that's a huge boiled down statement. It's the faith you have in your boss, and your boss's faith in you. It's the faith you have in your subordinates, and your subordinates' faith in you. It's the faith you have in your peers, and your peers' faith in you. And ladies and gentlemen, if you step out on a limb and you decide to lead an organization out of this arena of the heels of failure, you're going to be out in the center of that and questioned in every quadrant. And what will you rely on when that moment takes place? What will you fall back on so that you can continue to put 1 foot forward, 1 foot in front of the other, and continue to persevere? And I offer it's the foundation that you were given when you walked out of your home, the foundation that you're getting in this phenomenal academy. It's a moral foundation. It's one that's built through the ages and tested through every year. People question what you're made out of and really what you stand for. And if you succumb to the political winds, if you choose to be somebody as opposed to do something significant, then you will always question your foundation. At the end of the day, at the end of your career, at the end of your life, when you're sitting back thinking on this journey that you're on, will you find that brilliant peace that's associated with doing the right thing based on those morals? Or will you live something more of a question mark? Food for thought.
All right. Thanks, Colonel Venable. Now, aside from being very inspirational, this panel is also very disciplined, and they've left a lot of time for Q&A, which was kind of the objective for this to start with. So what we'll do is if you'll queue up the microphones, I'll simply go back and forth. I would ask also that you state your name and the institution you represent at the front end of your question. And if you have this question for one particular person on the panel, please identify that. Otherwise, I'll just divvy it up to whoever we think sees fit. Right?
Ma'am, gentlemen, I'm Cadet Nettie Coven. I'm from Virginia Tech Corps Cadets. This is directed to Sergeant Major. I have a question. While you were over combat in Iraq or Afghanistan, was there any reoccurring problems you had, and how did you solve those reoccurring problems?
Thank you very much. That's a great question. And yes, I mean, you will always have problems. And the key to that, you have to trust the leadership. I mean, you have to push the leadership down. So when you have problems, you got to push it down to those small unit leaders, because the battlefield today is dispersed. So you got to trust those young corporals and sergeants, those young officers, because they will do the right thing. So that's how we actually fix the problem. We push that leadership down. Does it answer your question?
Yes, Sergeant Major.
Nice, thank you.
My name is Alex Mace. I'm a senior from Southern Methodist University. My question is for Colonel Venable. You mentioned the setting, working with an elite team, part of getting them really engaged is setting big, brave goals. But I think the hardest part of coming from failure to those big goals is how do you really ignite the fire, particularly in high-performing individuals, to kind of get back in the saddle, to get back going. So if you can speak from your own experience, how do you really kind of reignite and re-engage those minds and those individuals to begin to perform at that higher level?
That's a great question. Did everybody hear it? It's reigniting the motivation, getting your team behind you to go and continue to put their feet in front of them and continue to drive forward. My words, is that correct?
Yes.
The first is the recognition, going back to where you are. If folks are questioning where they are in their basis of being, look at Enron, look at Penn State. There are people who will sit back and look at those organizations from within as they are going through a failure, and they're in denial. And so getting them to come to terms with where they are in that setting is the first and foremost thing. And then it's giving them hope and a huge goal for them to drive for in the future. The hope is what the organization can be. And the hope is in them and the phenomenal role that they can take to get there. That's daily. We talked about servant leadership. Once you set the foundation and you set that distant goal, from that point forward, it's giving them the support and giving them making sure that their needs are met to capture this greatness that's theirs. And that's the basic line that I'll leave you with, is the fundamental premise of where you are and the hope that you can do something phenomenal. I'll leave you with one other thing. The greatest gift I was given as someone who was awfully sick was the news, that very real news, that I would never fly again. The hope came from within me as soon as those words were met, and I said, yes, I will. And as soon as I started driving for this unbelievably ridiculous goal of becoming the Thunderbird commander, my family started being swept up in it. This small team leadership is something that I relearned right there, is once you get everybody moving in a direction and they believe that you can get there, you will carry people to places they could never have imagined without you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Please.
Cadet G, United States Military Academy. Sergeant Major Kent, you mentioned the importance of building the team and bringing people together. When does adversity bring people together? When does it tear people apart? And does the leader have anything to do with that?
Adversity, could you just say it again, please?
When does adversity bring people together, and when does it tear them apart? And does the leader have anything to do with that?
Yes, and that's a great question. Adversity will tear a team down, and it will pull them together. But the key to that, you have to train to adversity. If you train to it, then you'll be able to know that, hey, no matter what, you can still make this happen. And that's why you always train your team up, and you train for things like that, especially over in combat, because it's some uncertainties over there. But if you train up to it, they can react to it.
Please.
I'm Braven Griffin from Southern Methodist University. Sergeant Major, you talked about when you were a young leader, you had leaders above you who allowed you to bounce back from your mistakes. So how do you go about, as a leader, allowing the people under you to do that, to bounce back from their mistakes?
I am, sorry about that, I am hard of hearing. There's been too many bangs.
Sergeant Major, the question in a nutshell is you were allowed to bounce back from mistakes as a young Marine. How do you, in turn, then make that decision to allow others below you to bounce back from their mistakes?
Thanks for the question, and that's very easy. Let me give you one example. I was out leading a platoon one day. I was a young staff sergeant, and it had to do with training. And I made a terrible mistake with that. It had to do with ammo, and that's one thing you do not play around with when you talk about training. But my leadership realized that I was trying to do the right thing. Did I suffer for that? Yeah, but they took care of me also. They made me understand in a different way that you just don't do that, Staff Sergeant Kent. But on the flip side of that, they seen something in me to know that I was trying to do the right thing for the Marines that I was leading. So you got to balance that. Is it one of those mistakes that it was an honest mistake that you will allow someone to bounce back from? Sure. Is it one of those things where it's an integrity problem that probably they shouldn't bounce back from? Maybe not. I mean, but you just got to balance that as a leader. And you have to be fair because everyone's watching you. And as long as you're fair to every individual, you won't have a problem.
Thank you.
My name is Josh Ratner. I'm a student at the University of Maryland. My question is for Mr. Cassano, and feel free to disagree with my premise.
It's got a loaded way to start this whole thing.
In the wake of failure or tragedy, members of an organization are more likely to be open to changes to things like changes in strategy and tactics, or things like the implementation of NIMS. How do you, I guess after that, oftentimes there's a drop-off in morale and unity and the desire to be open to change because I guess the initial boost in morale from the initial failure kind of goes away. How do you compensate for that drop-off in unity and cohesiveness and the desire for change?
That's a good question. I was just wondering where you were going when you started. First, let me, in the fire service, there's a saying, we never let progress get in the way of tradition. So change doesn't come easy. I can tell you that. But I think we knew that we had to make changes because of the way, of the circumstances that we faced. I mean, and there were positive changes. We knew we needed more training. We knew we had a huge loss of experience. We knew that we were going to face challenges that we had never faced before, such in the world of counterterrorism, such as in the world of hazmat. So the membership really did embrace the training and the changes. And while they're, I'm going to say maybe after 3 or 4 years, when people get a little complacent that we didn't have another incident, we had to reinforce what had happened on September 11th to say, you have to train so that if we do face another event like we did, we will be ready. And that's when I focused in on the loss of the members and their families to reassure them that this would never happen again. And you focus on the positive aspects of the training, and then people sort of come back into the fold. And they realize that what we were training and what we were doing was actually for the betterment of the department, for the betterment of themselves, and coming back to our #1 mission, to make sure that every one of the people that work for you is safe. That's our #1 mission. I say that every day I go to work, that I want everyone to go home. And they know that. And that's when you build up that credibility. So when there was a little bit of a lull, we bring them back to say, our mission is to be prepared for what had happened, and we need to train, train, and train.
Thank you.
Hello, Taylor Henry, also from Southern Methodist University, but I'm studying engineering, and I'm actually helping lead a student organization. And we've talked a lot about training. We've mentioned that's kind of a lot of the preparatory work for what goes on to actually fail in the field. And so I was wondering from the standpoint, first being civilian, but also like engineering projects that fail could cause life, and most of the time do in civil engineering, which is what I'm studying. So how do you prepare in the classroom, or how do you prepare in an organization for those failures without the consequences being so severe? Would you encourage setting up for failure to make sure that it happens a lot through school? Or would you just say prepare them mentally so that when it happens, hopefully they respond well? And any insights from experience?
Great. If I could turn that one over to Commander Flannigan, since a fellow engineer, somebody interested in training.
Yeah, fellow engineer from a while back. I think, you know, when you're talking about safety-related stuff, obviously, you want to do more classroom. You never want anything as far as loss of life or severe injury to incur. So I feel like that's an easy part of the question, that you just want to do more classroom-type learning, but practical interaction. And I think what we take, especially like in the aviation field, something we do all the time from, you know, way before we start talking about a mission or anything we're going to do as a unit, is we always talk about goods and others and kind of learning points and contingency plans and plan it out to the nth degree. We have very robust, dedicated safety departments. So I would say, you know, especially when it's safety related, as much planning as you can do, contingencies, the what ifs, how we're going to handle that, and having a plan so that when it does happen, you're a little bit better prepared and you can react quickly. Like the Sergeant Major was talking about earlier, if you plan for the worst case scenario, then people can react a lot better. So when you're dealing as far as the safety portion of that, I think that's really imperative. But when it's not safety related, we learn so much from actually doing something and failing at it and talking about it. So every time we come back from a flight, the first thing we do is we don't say what are the bads, we say the others. We don't want to call it a bad thing, but we say what are the others, and we all volunteer. This is what I did wrong, and this is what we can all learn from, and this is how we can do it better the next time. And if we did everything right, you can't really effectively learn as well, but it's when we truly fail at something and you look at the takeaways that you can succeed. So when it's not a safety-related thing, getting out there and doing it and trying it and seeing how it goes, because there's going to be avenues and aspects of that you couldn't potentially think about in a classroom, but once you start doing it, it becomes much more apparent. But again, safety related, I would say plan, and try to prevent anything negative from happening in that regard. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning, Dustin Picard, senior at the University of Maryland. My question is directed for Sergeant Major Kent, but feel free for any of the panelists to speak up. As a graduating senior this spring, I guess my biggest concern is like, how am I going to assimilate myself into the next organization, next chapter of my life? And you briefly mentioned what it was like being the new guy. So I'm wondering what advice you have to kind of assimilate yourself into the next chapter of life, next organization, and also how to assert yourself as a leader from the beginning.
I am sorry.
Right, no problem. I've got it. Sergeant Major, this is a good one too. At your particular time in life, the question essentially is, when you're going into a new organization, how do you go about kind of fitting in? The term that he's using is assimilate into a new organization, and that's a particularly fitting one for somebody going from the military to the corporate world and now going into the realm of a business owner.
Thank you. That's a great question, and I tell you, after serving 36 years as a Marine, I had to assimilate into the corporate world about a year ago, and that was a big culture shock to me. The good thing about it, I had great people at the company, and they assisted me in that. But you just gotta, like me, I just say, okay, this is 36 years that I'm gonna have to put back and focus on my future. But, like the Eagle Globe and Anchor, it will be branded in my heart forever. But I have to understand that I am not the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps anymore. Right. Matter of fact, they gave me a little cubby hole, and they say, this is your office. I say, I got it. You just have to have, the mindset that you have to transition to your next life. If I can ask, are you going into the military?
I'm currently applying for Navy OCS right now, but the selection board's not until June, so we'll see about that. So it might be the civilian world, kind of depends.
Well, that is a great step, is to transition there. Can I recruit you into the Marine Corps right now?
We can talk after, sure.
No, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
If possible, I'd like to just add really quickly on that.
Please.
I think within the military specifically, kind of what you're talking about happens a lot. Every time we change units, you're starting from scratch, and you have to kind of reestablish yourself as a member of that unit, as a leader, just making friends and learning to work with people. And what I was always taught from a very young age as a junior officer is you always want to show up someplace and kind of keep your mouth shut for a while. Keep your ears open, your mouth closed, and take in the environment and see what's going on, because no one wants someone to walk in and immediately, before really understanding the unit or the company, start talking about how they want to change things or how they want to do things. That obviously just kind of puts people off, and you're not fully educated on what's going on. So by just listening and being quiet, you can learn a lot about how the company runs professionally, how the people interact, the social economics. I mean, you really can get a lot there. And then as far as breaking out as a leader or assimilating with people, it's amazing how far it will get you in a professional area if you are just respectful and professional. And I always tell people, if you're not sure how to act or what kind of jokes you should be telling or how you should be interacting, if you default to being respectful and professional, that will never lead you astray. It'll kind of keep you in the right direction. And by doing that, you're going to be the type of person people want to be around anyway, because you're not saying things that are offensive and you're not giving your opinion on how things can be done better. Listen, and then once you understand what's going on, that's when, hey, because you've been respectful and professional and you've talked to people and developed some friendships and relationships, now you can say, hey, have you guys ever thought about it doing this way? You know, this might be a good idea. And from there, you can start to lead and you can start to impact how your company or unit works as a team. And I think that that's always been really effective for me.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Could I do just a little bit of pile on?
Sure.
You haven't been punished enough. Yeah, the thought process that Meagan just talked about is absolutely true. This is shut up and color for a while. But the other side of it is jump in with both feet. If you keep putting a toe in the water and wanting to know what it's like in there, you're never going to become a leader in an organization. And that was the second part of your question. Jump in with both feet and close on the car in front of you. The concept of drafting is alive and well in life, just like it is in racing. And as you begin to show your commitment, your loyalty, your trust, you will be empowered in an organization. Those are keys to success. Shut up, color, jump in with both feet.
Nice.
Thank you.
Mr. Cassano, jump in too? While we're on it.
As Meagan said, you have 2 ears to listen, 1 mouth to speak. And just get the lay of the land first, understand the new organization, the new unit, and then get involved, because you have a lot to offer as a leader. That's why you're here. Make sure you get involved.
It's like a bonus question. We have all 4. Nicely done.
Thank you, everybody.
Nicely done. Please.
Yes. Hi, my name is Claire Perez, and I'm a representative from Tufts University, and my question is directed towards Mr. Cassano. Forgive me, I was at school and I wasn't home during Hurricane Sandy, and I just want to know how the fire department responded, because it wasn't a terrorist attack, it wasn't a fire, it was a natural disaster, and I don't know, my grandparents live in Queens, so.
I don't know if that's a setup question, but I was waiting for somebody to ask that, so that's great.
Yeah.
When we talk about the preparation, and as the young man asked before, how do we keep people engaged? And one of the things that we had done after September 11th is devise a game plan for another terrorist attack where we would decentralize our boroughs, where we would give command to the people that we've trained over the years, so that if it was a citywide event, each borough would be a command unto itself. I would respond out of headquarters, where I would get to be the general planner. Never thought it was going to be a hurricane. So we've developed a Center for Counterterrorism and Disaster Preparedness to cover both ends. And in the summer of 12, we had a series of drills throughout the city just to keep people engaged. And this year's drills were hurricanes. And we drilled in every area of the city that could possibly be touched by a hurricane. And every one of those areas was hit. So we were very well prepared because of that training. And that just reinforced what we were teaching over the last 11 years. And we did the members in the field acted under conditions like they've never faced before. Whether they were firefighters, whether EMTs or paramedics or fire officers, every one of them acted according to their training. Now, it wasn't training specifically for a hurricane, but all of that training and that discipline kicked in. They did a tremendous job. The proudest achievement of the whole event, I mean, we lost 43 people in the city, and that was after an evacuation order, and most of those people came from the evacuation zone. But with all the work that we did as a department, we did not suffer one serious injury. And it was life-threatening conditions throughout the city. But because of their training, because of the constant attention we pay to safety, they were able to do their job, but do it safely. And that's what we were so proud about. They did a great job for us.
Thank you.
All right, good morning. My name is Jane. I'm from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and my question is directed at Lieutenant Flannigan. And I'm just wondering if you've ever faced any challenges being a woman in a predominantly male environment, and also how did you overcome those challenges, and also do you have any advice for the young women leaders in this room?
Thank you. It's a great question. She was, for anyone that didn't hear, just asked about challenges I might have faced as a woman in a somewhat male-dominated environment. Absolutely, I did. You know, I'd say the first challenge was when I decided I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and women were not allowed to be fighter pilots. So just kind of setting that goal for myself, and then staying focused on it and saying, you know, I'm going to do it regardless. And luckily, rules changed, and women were allowed to start flying in combat. But when I experienced the challenges I did on deployment, I was the only female aviator on the aircraft carrier of 5,500 people. So you can imagine how isolating that is and how much it really puts a spotlight on being a minority. I will say that most of my career, I didn't have a lot of negative interactions being the only woman, but when I started flying in the F-14 specifically, it was a very male-dominated environment. And there had only been approximately 10 women that have ever flown it, and they had kind of been somewhat blacklisted is what men were coming up and telling me. So yes, I did face that. I will tell you that it doesn't matter what you do in life. It doesn't matter if you're a man, you're a woman, you're black, you're white. You can go into any environment, and there will be 10 people. 2 of them are going to be phenomenal people. You know, 2 of them are just going to be horrible. And you know what I mean? You just have to determine how you're going to let those people affect you, because they only have the power over you that you give them. So did I listen to the 1 or 2 people that had negative things to say to me? No. I focused on the other people in the room that were supportive and wanted me to be there. And, you know, like I talked earlier, I just tried to be respectful and professional and default to that. Was that extremely challenging at times? Absolutely. But was that the best course of action for me? Absolutely. And I think for women, and really any minority, just holding on to that mantra that it's not about being a minority, and I don't like to emphasize that as far as my experience, because it doesn't matter who you are. White men get as much, you know, as much of a negative experience in certain work environments as a black woman or whatever the demographic is, you know what I mean? So it's about your mindset and what you let affect you. So go into your work environment, do your job, you know, do it with integrity, be ambitious, be respectful, and lead by example. And when someone is doing something that isn't appropriate, when other people view that, they're going to see you leading by example and being, you know, just a professional, and they're going to see the other person not doing that. And that's going to speak more than anything you could possibly say. I've learned that, trust me, after trying to straighten them out and trying to fight back and trying to do a lot of different things. And through my career, I've found that that's what makes me be able to go home and be the happiest, because as soon as you engage people that have an issue with you or minority, it brings you to their level, and it brings you to a bad place. So the best you can do is just focus on your role in whatever community you're working in, and just take ownership of that and pay attention to the people that want you to be there. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Please.
Morning, ma'am, gentlemen. Midshipman 3rd Class White, United States Naval Academy. My question is also directed towards Commander Flannigan. I'm an aerospace engineer, and last semester I was constantly thinking about quitting the major, but I was wondering, how often do you attribute your experiences here as an aerospace engineer towards your perseverance in the fleet as a Navy pilot?
Are you talking just in generally as getting through the major?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, then you're talking to the right person, because I was Aero Astro, and I was the person that the first day of class, I found the really smart kid, and I went and sat next to him and said, let's be lab partners. So I completely know what you're talking about. I think anytime you work really hard and you persevere when something is really difficult, it's going to help you. So me being able to dig in my heels and really, I mean, I was in EI with my professors, you know, for an hour every single week, and I'd still get a D in a class. So trust me, I'm with you there. But it's just like anything else, to conquer it and to be able to say, I made it through and I graduated with an aero degree. And if I could do that, then yeah, I can do flight school and I can do this and I can do that. And it definitely gives you that confidence that you didn't quit at something. And I mean, I was brought up and I live my life that once I commit to something, I'm gonna finish it. And even if it's really challenging, I'm gonna finish. Even if I don't like it, I'm gonna finish. And so that's the mentality I took with my aero degree, and then I applied to pretty much everything I do. And for me, living that mantra has really, like I said, it just empowers you, and it gives you the confidence you need to know you can conquer other things. And when I got to flight school, it made it a lot easier to know, yeah, I can hunker down, I can study this stuff and do well. So I would tell you to stick with it. It will be worth it at the end. At least it was for me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, keeping you busy. First Class Shay from here at the Naval Academy. The aviation community is unique in that you have your flying job and your ground job. Having gone through a significant personal challenge with your tough landings on the carrier, how did you find that affected your ground job? And were you able to kind of compartmentalize those two things? Or did you find that it affected your leadership in your other job as well?
Great question. And I think it's good that you bring in compartmentalization, because I think that's a huge aspect of working in any environment whatsoever, just not letting one thing affect the other. I can say, for me, I had a hard time compartmentalizing as far as it affected me just flying, but I was good at compartmentalizing and not letting it affect my job, just because I took specifically when I was a branch officer and a division officer, and especially when I was working with our troops, I took that very seriously. And for me, it was almost therapeutic to say, hey, I'm really stressed out with the flying thing. Let me go spend some time in my shops and talk to my troops and see what they're doing. And it gave me some good perspective, and it made me realize, you know, in the big gamut of things, kind of where my stress, where my challenges maybe weren't as big of a deal. And it made me say, you know, if I'm having a little bit of a struggle in the air portion of my job, I'm not going to fail at the officer and leadership portion of my job, or I'm not going to fail at the collateral part of my job. And it made me really almost overcompensate and work harder in those areas, because in my eye, being an officer is your number one job, and then being an officer that's flying is kind of the number two job. Some people think aviation's, like flying is the first thing and officer's the second thing, but I think that's not correct. So for me, it made me just really hunker down, and the most rewarding, flying's great, don't get me wrong, but as far as your role as an officer in the aviation field, specifically working in the maintenance department with the troops, that's where it's all about. I mean, you're going to get so much more satisfaction out of that experience than you are really working in any other department or flying the airplane, because working with people is why we're all here. Leading and managing and being supportive and helping them combat whatever stressors they have in your life, that made me feel better at the end of the day. If I had a bad landing, I'm like, yeah, but I just helped Airman so-so rewrite a budget, and you know, his wife and him are going to be able to buy a house, and that made me feel really good. So, you know, that's kind of, like I said, it was therapeutic and almost helped me to do better in those jobs.
All right, great. Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Walter Snook. I'm a Army ROTC cadet and a senior at Princeton University. And Dr. Thomas, I'm also extremely nervous in the presence of sergeant majors, so I'll try to get through this without stuttering. But my question really is about balance and finding harmony. So I guess Sergeant Major, if I could address this to you first, but everyone, if they could comment as well, would be great. Hopefully this will be relevant for both military and civilian individuals. How do you find the balance for, especially as a junior officer and then as a junior manager in a store or wherever, find the balance between yourself and your responsibilities and then for officers, for enlisted soldiers? So find the balance in that relationship between junior officers and enlisted soldiers.
That's a great question, and you have to have a balance, because as an officer, you know, you can't get into the thing where you're going to be the buddy of the enlisted. But at the same time, you got to build that team. So how do you do that as a young officer? You know how you do that? You get with that platoon sergeant or that senior enlisted, and they can assist you in building a team with those enlisted. Nothing's wrong with you going out to a bar with your men and women. I mean, it's nothing wrong with that in a social environment. That's how you build a team. You know, I used to always say, hey, Marines, we're going to work hard and we're going to play hard. And Marines love to play hard. So, but at the same time, you know, it's things that you can find out in a social environment about people that you don't find out when you're training with them or you're in combat with them. But in that social environment, you can find out a lot about their families, because as a leader, you need to know what make that individual tick. Because you need to know the changes in their life. If you see any changes, then you're going to know that that individual is having problems in their personal life. So you got to know that individual in their personal life and as a military person. Long as you don't, and it's a balance to that. But you as a leader, you will find that balance. For me, I used to find a balance of, you know, I am one of these type of people as a leader. Somebody mess up, I can chew them out on the spot. 10 minutes later, it's like nothing ever happened. And that's the type of leadership you should be doing.
Thanks, Sergeant Major.
I'm Rachel Sampson from the College of the Ozarks, and my question is directed to Sergeant Major Kent and Lieutenant Commander Flannigan. As Mr. Cassano and Colonel Venable said, they had different things motivating them during their times of strife. I know for Mr. Cassano, it was just to honor the memory of the fallen firefighters, and for Colonel Venable, it was the desire to continue to fly even though he was diagnosed with cancer. What personally motivated each of you to continue throughout your struggles through flight school or through the struggles you faced as a sergeant major? What motivated you to keep going?
I'll just be quite honest with you. What motivated me is the people that I led. Because the people that I lost in combat, I will continue for them because I owe them that to stay focused. Because they are part of me each and every day. You know, the reason that I stayed around the Marine Corps for 36 years, it wasn't the Marine Corps. It was the Marines in the Marine Corps that I was honored to lead and serve with. That's who that was. So the people motivated me each and every day, and that's why I stayed around the Marine Corps for 36 years.
For me, first and foremost, it was the dream. You know, I'd been trying to be a fighter pilot, dreaming about being a Tomcat pilot for 15 years, so I didn't want to not be doing that anymore. But, you know, right in line with that, and something that I talked about with my family quite a bit during that time and with my squadron mates, was I felt an immense amount of responsibility to do it right for women behind me. That was the only thing that really resonated with me as far as, you know, kind of the minority question we had earlier. But I wanted to continue to pave the way, and I wanted to be a female pilot that did it right and was the type of woman that men would want in their squadron, and that it succeeded and was good enough to be there. And I took that part of it. Like, that was the part that hit me the hardest, because I really felt like I was letting women down during that period of time. And that's what really motivated me, is I didn't want that to be my legacy. I wanted my legacy to be one of strength and one of the type of wingman someone would want with them, or someone they'd want to fly into combat with. And that really motivated me throughout my deployment to turn things around.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Eric Abney, and I'm a member of Yale's NROTC unit. My question is for Colonel Venable. Obviously, as the commander of the Thunderbirds, you were leading very high-level members of your unit on a day-to-day basis. My question is, how did you approach leading such successful peers and managing to garner their respect, still making sure you had a very high-functioning, high-level unit?
Was it Eric? Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
It's a great question, Eric. And it kind of doesn't matter whether you're leading a bunch of astronauts or a bunch of garbage collectors. It doesn't matter. It's you setting the example for your conduct and walking the talk that you set for everyone else. If you say the standards are one way and you live another life completely people will jink away from you at the first turn. We had a maneuver where we called it an echelon turn in the regular fighter parlance. And there was about 18 inches of distance between the ventral fin of the airplane in front of you to the canopy of the next jet in line. And unless you embed this thought process of trust from the very first day and you live trust, and this is that faith thing, how people view you is a very important thing. If you are not stable, if you are not the platform from which they can fly from, they're going to follow you at a distance, and if something turbulent comes into play, they'll jink away from you at the first lie. So in any unit, it's leading by example. It's walking the talk that you so eloquently state to everyone else. We had this thought process of practice. We would practice maneuvers over and over in a range, thousands of times. And the whole time we were out there, there was a guy on the ground that was looking up, and he was grading our every maneuver. But you got to know, the whole time we were out there, there were 5 other sets of eyes on me, watching my every move, not just in the way I executed the maneuver, but on the space in between. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir, it does.
And so, when my wife called on the phone, and if I hung up the phone and I said, "That stupid woman," what do you think that sends the message to everyone else? It is consistency across the board. And if they see a flaw in your consistency, it is a cancer like none other with regard to trust. Long answer.
Thank you, sir.
Nice. One of my least favorite parts of a panel is to have to announce this. We only have time for one more question, so rather than having you stand up there, sorry, Ian, we'll just take this final question.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. My name is Nick Cernak. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania, and Mr. Cassano, I have a question for you. Back September 11th, 2001, I was 9 years old, and I remember watching the news, but I really didn't have a full grasp of what was going on. Now, last month, I recently watched a documentary that had a lot of live footage from that day, and watching that, I was frightened, I was angry, and I was frustrated. And so, sir, I wanted to ask you, being on the ground on that day, how did you channel those emotions to be an effective leader?
That's what actually drove me. Being at the base of the North Tower at the command post with our Chief of Department, Peter Gansey, and working with him. And when the South Tower collapsed, I was given orders to evacuate everybody north. Pete went south. Pete was killed. A number of people that I commanded that day were killed. They all followed their orders. They all looked at me in the eye. We knew it was going to be a terrible day. We knew some of us weren't going to come home. And that's what constantly drives me, to make sure that the people that I gave orders to that have not come home, ensure their families know that their loss wasn't in vain, ensure that their memory will be honored, which we have done, and that's what constantly drives me. So I've channeled that anger, because I still get angry, but I channel that anger into a positive, and the positive was to rebuild this department from the ground up, which we had to do, trust the people that work for me and with me to make sure that it never happens again. And as a young woman asked, how do we do in Hurricane Sandy? That was because of all of that energy spent to ensure that September 11th never happens again. We were able to handle a hurricane of tremendous historic proportion without suffering one injury. And I think that sent a message to every one of our families that we are looking out for their husbands and their wives that are coming to work so that they will go home to their families. And that's what we're really proud of.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for our tremendous panel.